My name is Billy Larson. I'm 32 years old, and on the morning of my wedding, my older sister walked into my bridal suite, in front of my four bridesmaids, and slapped me across the face. She told me our parents weren't funding the wedding, that it was too expensive, that I should call it off. What she didn't tell me was that the $45,000 my grandmother left me in her will had been gone for 2 years. Moved, spent, quietly moved through accounts I never knew existed, including the down payment on a condo that has Stella's name on the deed. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Because 3 weeks before that moment, I had already hired an estate attorney, and I had already arranged for him to be at my reception that evening. Stella thought she was stopping a wedding. She was actually walking into the last room she'd ever control. I want to start at 7:30 in the morning, because that's when everything still felt possible. The bridal suite smelled like the vanilla candle Claire had lit the second we walked in. 4 of us getting ready. Me, Claire, and 2 friends I'd known since grad school. Someone had put on a playlist. Someone else had ordered room service, and the trays were sitting on the table mostly untouched because nobody really eats on a wedding morning, no matter how much they think they will. I was in the chair in front of the mirror. Claire was pinning the back of my hair and telling me to stop fidgeting. "Your hands," she said. "Stop." "I'm not doing anything." "You've touched your hair 4 times. I haven't started on your hair yet." I put my hands in my lap. My coffee was on the vanity beside me, still full. I hadn't touched that either. The honest reason I couldn't settle: Stella hadn't texted. Not a good morning, not a see you soon, not even the kind of passive-aggressive message she sometimes sent that I'd learned to read like weather. Nothing. And Stella always had something to say. Always. At 8:15, I told myself she was running late. At 8:25, I told myself she was being dramatic and would sweep in right before the ceremony with some performance of affection. At 8:29, there was a knock at the door. Not the knock of someone who's excited to see you, heavier than that. The knock of someone who has already decided exactly what they're going to say when the door opens. Stella walked in wearing a dark blazer and slacks. No flowers, no smile. She wasn't dressed for a wedding. She was dressed for a meeting she'd already rehearsed. The room changed the second she entered. That's a thing I've never been able to explain, but anyone who has grown up next to a person like Stella knows it. A certain kind of presence doesn't just enter a room, it reconfigures it. The music felt suddenly out of place. The vanilla candle seemed like a mistake. Claire turned around. I watched Stella scan the room once, quickly, the way she always assessed situations for leverage. "I need to speak with Billy, alone." Claire didn't move, didn't even shift her weight. "Whatever you need to say, you can say it here." Stella's jaw tightened. Just slightly. Not enough to look angry. Just enough to tell me she hadn't anticipated that. I noticed her hands, both of them hanging at her sides. Empty. No card, no gift, no coffee she'd brought as a gesture. Nothing. Just hands she had already decided what to do with. She looked at me instead of Claire. "Mom and Dad aren't giving you the $20,000. We've decided the wedding is too expensive. You should call it off." I heard Jen make a sound. Something short and involuntary. I was looking at Stella's face. Not quite anger in it. Not regret. Something harder to name. The expression of a person who has been waiting for a long time to say a particular thing and has finally located the opening. "Stella," I said. "What are you talking about?" And she hit me. I want to be careful here because people sometimes imagine these moments as more cinematic than they are. It wasn't a dramatic movie slap. It was deliberate, controlled. The kind of thing a person does when they have already pictured it, already decided it was necessary, and are executing a plan rather than losing their temper. Her hand connected with the left side of my face, and for approximately 2 full seconds, nobody in that room made a single sound. Then Claire said, "Oh my God." The silence that followed a cue taught like that is something I will never forget. Not the pain, which faded fast, but the silence. 4 people in a room going completely still, the music still playing on someone's phone, the candle still burning, and everything else frozen. Stella stepped back. She said, "And I will remember this for the rest of my life. Cancel this. We won't fund your expensive wedding." Claire's hand came down on my shoulder. The door opened again. Mom and Dad. My father looked at the floor when he came in. My mother looked at a point somewhere past my left shoulder. The specific place a person looks when they can't bring themselves to look at your face. Dad said, "Billy, we never meant for this to become a fight. We can't do this right now." I asked him, "Can't or won't?" He didn't answer. He opened his mouth and then closed it and looked at the floor again. Mom didn't say a word. Not one. She stood there in the dress she'd bought for this day and looked at the wall behind me, and the only thing I could think was that she had known this was coming. She had known what Stella was about to do when she walked in that door, and she had come anyway, and she still couldn't meet my eyes. I turned back toward the mirror. My face was red on one side. The eyeliner I'd been putting on when Stella knocked was still in my hand. I had been holding it this entire time without realizing it. I sat down, slowly, deliberately. "Thank you for letting me know." Claire made another sound, something between a laugh and a gasp. I uncapped the eyeliner. I looked at myself in the mirror. The red would fade. My hand was not shaking. Stella said it from the doorway before she left. "If you go through with this, you'll regret it." I did not turn around. The door clicked shut. I heard their footsteps in the hallway. 3 sets of them, getting quieter. Claire stood completely still behind me for a moment. Then she knelt down so her face was level with mine in the mirror. "Billy." "I'm fine," I said. "You're not fine." "I know. But I'm getting married." She looked at me for a long time. Then she picked up the second eyeliner brush and handed it to me. "Ryan's mother found out from a text Claire sent Ryan while I was getting my hair finished. Carol showed up at the suite door 20 minutes later and didn't ask a single question. She just took my arm, and when we reached the entrance to the ceremony hall, she held it tighter and said, 'I've got you, sweetheart.' That was all. It was everything." Ryan cried at the altar. I hadn't predicted that. He's the kind of person who cries at commercials and then looks away quickly, embarrassed, so I probably should have predicted it. But watching him standing there trying to hold himself together, I thought about the last 2 hours. The knock. The blazer. My mother's eyes trained on the wall behind me, and I thought, this is exactly the right place to be. These are exactly the right people. The ceremony was small and real, and nothing about it felt like a consolation prize. Stella was somewhere across town. Paul Crawford was already getting ready for the reception. If you want to understand what happened on October 18th, you have to go much further back. This didn't start with a slap. It started the way a lot of things start. Slowly, over years, so gradually that no one thinks to name it until the name becomes unavoidable. My sister Stella is 4 years older than me. She's 36. She's a real estate agent. She's charming in social situations. She has a way of entering a room and immediately becoming the center of it that I spent most of my childhood interpreting as confidence before I understood it was something else. And she has spent her entire adult life living within 20 minutes of my parents' house. I'm not saying that's wrong. Some people stay close to family because they love them and want to. But with Stella, it was never just proximity. She wasn't close to my parents in the way that involves Sunday dinners and remembering birthdays. She was close in the way that involves being the constant point of reference, the one they called first. The one whose opinion shaped every family decision in ways that were never openly stated, but were always somehow operative. My parents are Donna and Alan Larson. My father spent 30 years as a contractor. My mother raised us and stayed home when we were young and made dinner every night and volunteered at the school. They are not bad people. I have been careful, in the years since all of this, to be precise about that. They are not bad people. They are people who spent 3 decades choosing the easier child to understand. There was never an announcement that Stella was the favorite. There didn't need to be. It was in the architecture, the invisible structure that determined who got believed, who got the benefit of the doubt, who was protected, and who was expected to manage. My parents never had to worry about Stella. They also never had to worry about me, for very different reasons. When Stella applied to college, there was no question. They would pay, she would stay in state. Everything was arranged without discussion. When I got a partial scholarship to a school 2 hours away, my father said he was proud and my mother said she would worry. Not, we're excited, not this is wonderful. Worry, as though the achievement were also a problem. The year Stella's first attempt at starting her own real estate business collapsed. 2020, not a great year for any number of reasons. My parents pulled 3 months of savings to cover her losses. I found out from an offhand comment my father made many months later at Thanksgiving, as though it were just a thing that had happened, and of course I already knew. I hadn't known. I wasn't part of the conversation. The year I got promoted, fall of 2022. My mother said, "That's wonderful, honey," and then asked if I could come over that weekend to help Stella move some boxes. I went. I moved the boxes. I didn't say anything. What made Stella particularly effective, and I say effective because that's the accurate word, was that her control was never loud. She didn't scream at me or cut me down publicly. She specialized in something subtler: the tilted head, the lowered voice, the sentence that always started with, "I just worry," or "I only bring this up because I care." She could make you feel like you had done something wrong without ever specifying what it was. Like the accusation was self-evident and you were being unreasonable for not already seeing it. She'd say things like, "I just worry you're making things harder than they need to be." And somehow, without quite understanding how, I would end up apologizing. Not to her, exactly. To the general situation. To the discomfort she had generated and was now positioning as something I had caused. In 2021, she let a misunderstanding develop between me and Ryan that could have ended us. She had a piece of information that would have clarified everything in 30 seconds, and she chose not to share it for 3 weeks. When things finally sorted themselves out, she sent me a text that said, "I'm so relieved you two worked it out." I was so worried. I didn't understand what she had done until much later. At the time, I just thought she'd been out of the loop. My parents are not villains. I want to say that again because I mean it. They are people who spent 30 years choosing the path of least resistance in a family where one child was loud and nearby and constantly present, and the other was quiet and self-sufficient and learned early to ask for very little. Stella had learned how to be needed. I had learned how to not need. And in a family system that runs on need, the second skill makes you invisible. So when Stella told them, sometime in the spring of 2022, that I wasn't financially stable enough to receive my inheritance right away, that it would be better, safer, more responsible to hold it until I'd settled down, they believed her. Not because they're cruel, because she was standing in front of them and I was not. And it was easier to believe. That was the crack in the wall. And Stella had been waiting for exactly that kind of crack for a very long time. The night before the wedding, we had the rehearsal dinner at a restaurant near the venue. 20 people. Good food. Candles on the tables. Stella stood up partway through the meal and raised her glass. She said, "Billy, I just want you to know that I've always wanted the best for you. I hope you feel that tonight." Everyone clapped. I smiled. She smiled back at me from across the table with perfect warmth. 14 hours later, she would walk into my bridal suite and hit me. "I need to tell you about my grandmother." Her name was Ruth Hayes. She died on a Tuesday morning in February 2022 from a stroke she didn't wake up from. She was 78 years old. She had been a third-grade teacher for 34 years before she retired, and after retirement she kept a garden, made pie from scratch whenever anyone visited, and had strong opinions about font choices and grocery store self-checkout lines. She was specific and dry and paying attention to things most people didn't notice. She was the first person in my life who made me feel genuinely visible, not in the way that involves constant reassurance. Ruth wasn't like that. She showed love through attention, which is different. She noticed what you actually liked, not what she thought you should like. She remembered things you'd said months ago and came back to them. She asked questions that told you she had been listening to your previous answers. When I was 25, working 2 part-time jobs while finishing my occupational therapy certification, she called me every Sunday morning, not to check in, just to talk. She never suggested I should have stayed closer to home. She never implied there was something anxious or excessive about the choices I was making. She told me once, very plainly, "Billy, your sister talks louder. That doesn't mean she's right." I keep coming back to that sentence. The way she said it, not as comfort, but as information. Like she was making sure I had data she considered important. I didn't know, when she said it, how much she had been watching all along. I didn't know until I read her letter. The one that should have reached me in 2022, the week the estate opened. The one that didn't reach me until my wedding reception, 3 years later. Ruth died on February 14th. The will was filed 3 weeks after that. She left a total estate of $90,000. Money from a career pension, savings she'd kept most of her adult life, and the proceeds from a small rental property she'd owned for decades. She divided it evenly, $45,000 to Stella and $45,000 to me. She named my father as executor. She had trusted him for 30 years. He was steady, she used to say. He kept his word. In early March 2022, I received an official notification from the probate court. I was a named beneficiary of the estate of Ruth Hayes. The process would take several months. I read it twice. I thought, "Grandma Ruth, you didn't have to do this." I called my mother to say thank you, just to say it out loud to someone. She said, "Stella's been helping your dad with the paperwork. You know how he is with forms." I said that sounded great. I asked if there was anything I needed to do on my end. "No," she said. "Stella's got it handled." I said okay. I didn't ask what account the funds would be going to. I didn't ask for a timeline. I trusted my family with a matter that was legally, formally, entirely mine, and I went back to my life. That was my mistake. I've thought about it many times since. It wasn't naive exactly. Most people trust their families with paperwork. But it was the opening Stella had been waiting for, and she walked through it with both hands. In March 2022, probate officially opened. My father was executor of record. Stella, being nearby and organized and happy to insert herself into anything that gave her access to information, began helping him navigate the process. My father handed things to her because she offered and because paperwork was not his strength, and because she was right there. In May of 2022, Stella sat down with my parents and told them something. She told them I was going through a difficult financial period, that I'd been struggling, that receiving a lump sum right now might not be good for me. She'd read something about how sudden inheritances could be destabilizing for people who weren't in a stable place. She suggested it would be more responsible, more protective, to hold my portion until I was more settled. What she didn't mention, I had just paid off my car loan 3 months earlier. I had 3 months of savings in my account. I had a full-time job and a stable living situation. There was no difficult financial period. She invented it entirely. But my father believed her. And because he trusted her, he agreed to open a joint account, in Stella's name and my mother's name, to temporarily hold my funds. I was not told. I did not authorize this. My written consent was legally required and was never obtained. The first withdrawal from that account happened in July 2022, $15,000, filed under home improvement. No home I was connected to was being improved. Between July of 2022 and March of 2023, Stella made 11 separate withdrawals. Each one was sized carefully. Not so large it would trigger automatic review, not so small it would take forever. Each one labeled vaguely: home improvement, family expenses, investment transfer. 11 transactions, 10 months, $45,000. Every cent my grandmother left me. 28,000 of it went to the down payment on an investment condo Stella purchased in June 2023. The deed is in her name. It has been generating rental income ever since. In January 2023, the probate court sent its first annual accounting notice. It was addressed to me, Billy Larson, beneficiary, and mailed to my address of record, which was still my parents' address because I hadn't thought to update it when I moved. Stella was at the house that week. She collected the mail. She kept the letter. I never received it. February 2023. Ryan proposed in our kitchen. Simple ring, white gold. Exactly what I would have chosen. I said yes without any hesitation and then cried for about 20 minutes in the best possible way. My parents came over that weekend and my mother cried too, and my father shook Ryan's hand and said he was glad. They told us they'd been putting money aside. They wanted to contribute $20,000 toward the wedding. My father said, "We want to be there for you." I didn't ask what account the money was coming from. By that point, Stella had already moved $39,000 of my $45,000. Within 6 weeks, she would have the rest. There was one more thing Paul would find. Not in the bank records, not in the forged documents, but in the estate file itself, buried in a stack of papers that anyone processing the estate would have seen and touched and handled. An envelope. White. Small. In my grandmother's handwriting. My name on the front. And below it, one word. Personal. Still sealed. 3 years after her death. Never delivered. I didn't know it existed until August 2025. When Paul slid it across his conference table and said quietly, "It was attached to the original will. It was never delivered." I picked it up. I turned it over once. I put it in my bag without opening it. Not yet. Not in that room. Not alone. Here's what 2.5 years of wedding planning looks like when someone is quietly trying to make you give up. You don't see it. That's the essential part. You think you're having normal friction. Everyone says wedding planning is full of it, full of family opinions and budget disagreements and unsolicited advice. So you absorb each instance as ordinary stress rather than what it actually is. You adjust. You accommodate. You tell yourself you're being practical and flexible, and you don't realize until much later that someone is very deliberately making you smaller. Ryan and I got engaged in February 2023 and spent about a month just being happy before the reality of logistics arrived. We set a preliminary budget that was not extravagant, but was not small either. The kind of wedding we actually wanted. A venue that could hold around 100 people. A photographer whose work made me feel something. A sit-down dinner. Normal things for 2 people who had waited for something they meant. Within a week of announcing it, Stella had opinions. Not once. Not in a single conversation that could be addressed and closed. Constantly, over months, across every aspect of the planning. The venue I fell in love with was, according to Stella, overpriced for what it was. The photographer whose work made me cry good tears was, she said, fine. But there were cheaper options if I wasn't picky. When I mentioned a caterer Ryan and I had loved for years, she pulled out her phone and mentioned staffing issues she'd seen in reviews. The reviews were from 4 years prior, before the current ownership. I didn't find this out until much later, after it was too late to undoubt. Stella delivers her concern in a very specific way. It involves a slight tilt of the head, sympathetic, not aggressive, and a sentence structure that always leads with, "I just want to make sure," or "I only say this because." It reads as care. It sounds like care. It is designed to sound like care. And it works because when someone frames a destabilizing statement inside a statement of love, you spend your energy deciding whether they're right rather than identifying what they're doing. By the fall of 2023, I had changed vendors twice. I had reduced the guest count once. I had quietly let go of the outdoor ceremony I'd been imagining since the beginning, because Stella had mentioned something about the venue's weather history. The venue had excellent ratings for outdoor events. My wedding planning notebook from that period is a record of erasures. Crossed out names, recalculated budgets, margins full of question marks. Claire saw it once, just a glimpse, and didn't say anything. But I saw her face. By 2025, something else had shifted. My mother had started hedging. Small comments about costs, said carefully, in the register of someone trying not to say the thing they're about to say. We're committed to helping, of course, but you know how Dad is about large expenditures. Not a retraction. Not yet. Just a softening of a promise that had once felt solid. In August of 2025, she sent me a text. "Do you actually need the full 20,000 from us, or would a portion work?" A portion. 2.5 years in, the number had quietly become negotiable. I showed it to Ryan. He read it twice. Then he said, very carefully, "Is something going on with your family's finances that you don't know about?" I said I didn't think so. The mortgage was paid off years ago. Dad's pension was stable. Ryan nodded. "Okay, I'm just saying, they're acting like people who don't have the money." I kept coming back to that. Not obsessively, but the thought would surface at odd moments, while I was driving, while I was finishing charts at work, and I wouldn't be able to quite put it down. It was Claire who finally said the thing that cut through all of it. We were at a dress fitting in September 2024. Stella had come, which I had agreed to in a moment of goodwill, and had spent the appointment suggesting that the dress I'd chosen was a lot and that something simpler would photograph better. The dress I'd actually wanted, the one that had made me cry in the good way, the first time I tried it on, I had set aside after the second fitting. Walking to the parking lot afterward, Claire took my arm. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to actually hear it." I said, "Okay." "Every single time Stella talks about your wedding, you get smaller. Every time. I watch it happen in real time and you don't notice. I don't know what she's doing exactly, but whatever it is, it's working. And I need you to notice." I stood there for a moment with the car keys in my hand. "I know," I said, then stopped letting it work. I heard her. What I didn't have yet was the reason. The piece that explained why Stella needed the wedding to fail, why she had been running this particular play for 2.5 years, why it was so important to her that I spend less, ask for less, be smaller. That piece arrived 5 months later on an ordinary Tuesday evening in March 2025. Ryan and I were at the kitchen table after dinner. He was on his laptop. I was going through the paper stack we keep meaning to sort. He looked up and asked, the way you ask things when you're not really looking up, casually, as though it had just floated through his mind. "Whatever happened with your grandmother's estate?" If you've ever had a family member treat your silence like permission, you already know exactly why I waited before I said a single word. Stay with me. I stopped moving. 3 years. My grandmother had been gone for 3 years. I had not received a check. I had not been asked to sign anything. No account number, no distribution statement, no closing document. Nothing. Every time the thought had surfaced, I had submerged it again under the assumption that these things take time, that my family had it handled, that Stella was good with paperwork and my father trusted her, and it would all get sorted eventually. I had no idea what had actually happened to $45,000 that was legally mine. I haven't received anything, I said. Ryan closed the laptop. Billy, it's been 3 years. I called my father the next morning, kept my voice neutral, asked how the estate proceedings were going, asked specifically about my portion. He said Stella had been managing the accounting and I should probably ask her. Something cold moved through me. Not anger. Not yet. The feeling of something that had been out of focus suddenly sharpening. A shape I hadn't wanted to see becoming unavoidable. I didn't call Stella. I looked up the phone number for the probate court in the county where Ruth's estate had been filed. I called on my lunch break. I explained that I was a named beneficiary of the estate of Ruth Hayes, filed in early 2022, and that I would like to request a copy of the accounting and distribution records. The woman on the phone said, "Of course. That's your right as a beneficiary. What address should I send it to?" I almost cried from those 6 words. That's your right as a beneficiary. As if it had been available to me all along. As if I had only needed to ask. 12 days later, a packet arrived. 15 pages. I sat down at the kitchen table and started from page 1. The estate had been opened correctly. The assets were properly inventoried. The will was valid. $90,000 total value. I went to the distribution section. I looked for my name. My name was not there. There was a line item, $45,000, transferred to a joint account held by Donna Larson and Stella Larson, dated May 2022, with a notation, held in trust pending beneficiary authorization. The account number was not mine. I had never seen it before. There was no document in the packet showing that I had ever authorized that transfer. Because I hadn't. Because no one had asked me. Because the authorization was a fiction Stella had constructed for my father, and my father had not questioned. I read the page 3 times. Then I called Ryan in from the other room. I put my finger on the line and said, "This is not my account. This has never been my account." He looked at it for a long time. He looked at me. He said, "You need a lawyer." I didn't sleep that night, not because I was crying. I wasn't. I was running the timeline in my head. 3 years of wedding planning. Stella asking about our budget, making suggestions that scaled things back, creating friction at every stage. My mother texting in August to ask if a portion would be enough. Ryan saying they're acting like people who don't have the money. She had spent it, all of it. And then she had spent 2.5 years making sure I spent as little as possible on a wedding, because my spending would eventually become a question, and a question would become an investigation, and an investigation would find what she had done. She hadn't been trying to protect me from an expensive wedding. She had been trying to protect herself from a paper trail. In April 2025, I found Paul Crawford through a bar referral. 2 separate sources mentioned his name independently, which I took as a good sign. Estate and probate litigation, 20 years of experience. I made an appointment, and I brought what I had. The probate notification from 2022, the records I'd requested from the court, and printouts of text messages from Stella referencing her involvement in helping Dad with the estate. Paul read through everything. 11 minutes. I counted because I had nothing to do with my hands. Then he set the documents down and looked at me. "Ms. Larson," he said, "I think we need to talk about what your sister did." It was the first time anyone with any authority had said it in exactly those words. Not there might be an issue. Not this seems irregular. What your sister did. I exhaled. Over the following weeks, Paul submitted a formal legal request for the bank records associated with the joint account. The records arrived in late April. 11 transactions. July 2022 through March 2023. Total, $45,000. Every cent. His email that evening. Billy, I need to meet with you. This week. I've found something. The meeting in early May was the first time I saw all of it laid out together. Paul had everything on the conference table: bank records, estate documents, additional materials he'd requested through the court. And he walked me through it the way you walk someone through something when you want them to understand every piece before you name what it means. The bank statements were already damaging: 11 withdrawals, each one labeled just vaguely enough to be plausible in isolation: home improvement, family expenses, property investment transfer. But together, across 10 months, they made a pattern no reasonable person could misread. The money flowed from the joint account into accounts traceable, step by step, back to Stella. Then Paul showed me the authorization forms. For my $45,000 to be legally redirected and drawn down the way it was, the estate needed written authorization from me. There was written authorization on file. 3 separate documents, signed on 3 separate occasions. All of them had my name on them. None of them had been signed by me. Paul placed them on the table. Then he placed beside them 2 documents that actually bore my signature: a lease agreement and a professional credentialing form. I am not a handwriting analyst, but I saw the difference immediately. My signature has a specific way of forming the loop on the L in Larson. It curves inward. I've done it that way my entire life. All 3 of the authorization forms curved outward. Is this your signature? Paul asked. No, I said. That's not mine. He nodded. He had already submitted them to a certified handwriting examiner. The analysis came back 3 weeks later and confirmed exactly what I'd told him. 3 forged documents, 3 fabricated authorizations. This was not a mistake, or a miscommunication, or a family that hadn't been careful with paperwork. This was deliberate, planned, executed across a period of months by someone who understood what they were doing and did it anyway. The condo came next. Paul had traced $28,000 of the withdrawn funds to a specific destination. That money, pulled from the joint account in installments between late 2022 and mid-2023, had been transferred to an account in Stella's name and used as the down payment on a property she purchased in June 2023. The deed was a matter of public record. I looked at Stella's name printed there on that document, Stella Larson, at an address I had never heard of, in a neighborhood 30 minutes from my parents' house. Investment property, currently rented out. I thought about how many times she had asked me whether Ryan and I were saving toward a house, how many times she had mentioned that the money we were spending on the wedding could be put toward equity. She had asked it with a tilted head and an expression of sincere concern. What happens to the property? I asked. We file for a constructive trust, Paul said. When someone uses another person's funds to acquire an asset without authorization, a court can declare that the holder is keeping the property in trust for the true owner. Stella cannot sell it, refinance it, or transfer it while the claim is pending. She had built her investment on my foundation. She had been collecting rent on it for 2 years with money my grandmother left me. And because she had moved everything through traceable accounts, because she had been clever but not quite clever enough, every dollar had a line connecting it back to Ruth Hayes' estate and to the name Billy Larson, beneficiary. Then Paul told me about the letters. The probate court sends annual accounting notices to beneficiaries on file. My address of record was still my parents' address. I had never updated it when I moved, which was an oversight I'd never had reason to correct. The first notice was sent in January 2023. The second was sent in January 2025. Both confirmed sent. Neither returned as undeliverable. Both addressed to Billy Larson, beneficiary. Neither had ever reached me. Stella was at the house regularly. She was known to collect the mail. Interfering with someone's mail addressed to them is a federal offense, Paul said. Section 1708 of Title 18. Knowingly retaining correspondence addressed to another person. She did it twice. I know, I said. He paused. Then he opened a separate folder. Smaller, set apart from the others. There's one more thing, he said. He slid the envelope across the table. White. Small. My name in my grandmother's handwriting on the front. Below it, personal. Still sealed. It was attached to the original will in the estate file, Paul said. It was supposed to be delivered alongside the estate correspondence. It was never delivered. I picked it up. I turned it over. I held it for a long time. She had written this, knowing she didn't have much time. She had clipped it to her legal documents because she wanted it to reach me through official channels. She had trusted the process. She had trusted that the person handling the estate would see her granddaughter's name on the front and do the right thing. Stella had been the first person to go through the estate file. She had seen this envelope. She had looked at my name in Ruth's handwriting and made a choice. I put it in my bag without opening it. Do you want to know what's inside before we proceed? Paul asked. I know enough, I said. I'd like to open it the first time in front of the right people. We talked for another hour about strategy. Paul laid out the options. We could file immediately. The evidence was already more than sufficient. Breach of fiduciary duty on my father's part. Fraud and conversion on Stella's. Mail tampering as an additional count. Civil damages including the full $45,000 plus interest, plus potentially punitive damages. Or we could wait. The wedding is in 6 weeks, I said. Paul didn't say anything. My mother is almost certainly going to come to the reception. Even after this morning, if I know her, she'll come alone. And there is something she needs to see, not hear from me. She's been hearing things from me her entire life, and deciding Stella was the more reliable narrator. She needs to see documents. From someone with authority, in front of witnesses. Somewhere she can't leave immediately without it meaning something. Paul looked at me for a moment. Tell me when and where, he said. We agreed on the reception. He would arrive at 6:45 p.m. I would have a seat and a table near the front reserved, and I would open my grandmother's letter for the first time in that room. The plan was set. The wedding was set. And Stella, confident, certain that she had disrupted whatever needed disrupting that morning in the bridal suite, was somewhere across town, waiting for a call from me that was never coming. Before I tell you what happened when Paul Crawford walked through that door, I have a question for you. If you found out a family member had been doing this to you for 3 years, would you confront them privately first? Or would you do exactly what I did? Drop it in the comments, then come back. Because what happened next is the reason this story ends the way it does. The wedding was small and real, and I have no regrets about any part of it. Ryan cried at the altar in the way he would probably describe later as just getting emotional, which is the phrase he uses when he is completely overcome and embarrassed about it. His mother held my arm through the entire walk up the aisle, steady, not saying a word after that first "I've got you." Claire stood beside me looking simultaneously radiant and ready for confrontation, which I found deeply comforting. There were no empty seats. Ryan's family redistributed quietly to fill every gap. We said our vows. We ate dinner. There was cake. My husband kept leaning over throughout the reception to say things that were either profound or slightly ridiculous depending on the moment, and I didn't always know which. And that was fine. At 6 o'clock, the reception was full and loud and warm, and the door opened and my mother walked in. Alone. No Alan. No Stella. She was wearing the dress we'd picked out together in August, the blue one, the one she'd been so pleased with when she'd tried it on. She had her purse held against her side the way she holds things when she's uncertain whether she has the right to be somewhere. She scanned the room until she found me, and then she crossed to where I was standing. I'm so sorry about this morning, Billy, she said. I'm so sorry. I hugged her. Briefly. Genuinely. I'm glad you're here, I said. Come sit down. There's something I need you to hear tonight. She gave me a look I recognized. Braced. Not afraid. The look of someone who already knows something is coming and is deciding whether to stay anyway. I led her to the table I'd been holding, close to the stage, clear sightlines to the center of the room. She sat down. I brought her a glass of water. I didn't explain anything yet. At 6:45, the door on the far side of the room opened. Paul Crawford. Gray suit. Briefcase. A thick brown folder under one arm. He scanned the room, found me, gave a small nod, crossed to the side of the room, and waited. My mother's eyes followed him. Who is that? His name is Paul Crawford, I said. He's an estate attorney. I hired him 6 months ago. I asked him to be here tonight. She looked at me for a long moment. Something in her face moved. Not collapse, not understanding, just the beginning of both. Mom, I said, please stay. A few minutes later, I stood up and took the microphone. I thanked Ryan. I thanked his family. His mother who had held my arm. His father who had made a toast so warm it had made 3 people cry. I thanked Claire, who had known something was wrong for 2.5 years and had never stopped saying so. I talked about what it means to be in a room full of people who show up, who are there not because they're supposed to be, but because they want to be. Then I said, before we close out tonight, I want to introduce someone. His name is Paul Crawford. He's been helping me recover something that belongs to me. I need my mother to be the first person who hears it from someone who isn't me. Paul came forward. He set his folder on the table in front of my mother and opened it. He was unhurried. Precise. The way a person is when they know the documents will do more than any raised voice could. Mrs. Larson, he said, I'm an estate and probate litigation attorney. Billy retained me in April of this year to investigate the administration of the estate of her grandmother, Ruth Hayes. I want to show you what that investigation found. He placed the bank statements on the table first. Turned them so she could read them. This is the joint account opened in May 2022. In your name and Stella's. This account received $45,000 from Ruth Hayes' estate. Those funds were Billy's, designated to her in the will. Over the following 10 months, this money was withdrawn in 11 separate transactions. He placed the bank statement pages down one at a time. My mother's eyes moved across the dates, the amounts, the notations. Her face was absolutely still. Then the condo deed. He set it on top. $28,000 of those funds was used as a down payment on this property, purchased in June 2023. The deed is in Stella's name. My mother's hand moved slightly on the table, not reaching for anything, just moving. Then he placed 3 documents in a row, and beside them, 2 others. These 3 forms purport to show Billy's written authorization for the transfers out of the estate account. This is what Billy's actual signature looks like, from documents she signed herself. He pointed without touching. I retained a certified handwriting examiner. The signatures on the authorization forms are not Billy's. They were forged. Someone at a nearby table said something very quietly. I didn't catch the words. I heard the tone. My mother was looking at the 2 sets of signatures side by side. She didn't need the handwriting analysis to see it. The difference was visible with the naked eye. The curl of the L, the slope of the letters, the particular pressure of someone trying to copy a signature they had studied but could not replicate. She said, but. Stella said Billy had agreed. That Billy had told her she wasn't ready for the money. Paul said, Billy never signed these documents, Mrs. Larson. Billy was never asked. Billy never agreed to this arrangement. The room had gone quiet in the way rooms go quiet when something real is happening. Not the silence of boredom, the silence of attention. My mother's hands were flat on the table, trembling slightly. She was staring at the signatures. I reached into my bag. I took out the white envelope. I held it up so she could see it, so anyone near enough could see it. The handwriting on the front. My name. Ruth Hayes's careful cursive, the same one from birthday cards and Sunday letters, the same one I had been reading my whole life. Paul found this in the estate file, I said. Attached to Grandma Ruth's original will. She wrote it before she died and attached it there so it would be delivered to me through official channels. It was never delivered. I broke the seal, unfolded the single page inside. The paper was cream. The handwriting was hers. I took one breath before I started reading. Dear Billy, I am writing this knowing I may not have much time left, so I want to say things plainly. The money I am leaving you is yours, not the family's, not to be decided upon or managed or held by anyone else. Yours. I am leaving it to you, because I want you to have a start that is entirely your own. A start no one can argue with, or take credit for, or take away. I know that sometimes in our family you have felt like the one who adjusts, the one who makes room, who goes quiet so others can be loud. I hope you know that I have always seen what you were doing, and I have always known what it cost you. You are not invisible to me, Billy. You never have been. I love you more than I have probably ever been very good at saying. Use this well. Build something entirely yours. All my love, Grandma Ruth. I almost didn't make it through the last line. There was a long silence after I stopped reading. Not the uncomfortable kind, the kind that has weight. That means something is being absorbed. My mother had her face in her hands. Ryan stood up from where he was sitting and crossed the room to stand beside me. He didn't say anything. He put one hand between my shoulder blades and stayed there. My mother looked up. Her eyes were red. She said, Billy, I swear to you I didn't know. I didn't know what she was doing. Mom, I said, I know you didn't know everything, but you also didn't ask. She looked at me for a moment. She didn't argue. There was nothing to argue with. I picked up the microphone one more time. Grandma Ruth left me money so I could build a life, I said. Stella spent it, but I am still building. And that is something no one can take from me anymore. I set the microphone down on the table. The sound it made when it touched the surface was small and final. Grandma Ruth, I said, to the room and to no one, and to her. This one's for you. Ryan's family started clapping. It moved through the room like something catching light. My mother sat at her table with her hands flat and her eyes down. Paul closed his folder with a quiet precision, latched it, and stood. Ryan and I stayed at the hotel that night. We ordered room service because neither of us had eaten at the reception, and we sat on the floor in our wedding clothes with pasta and bad pay-per-view and 2 glasses of something cold. And we did not talk about Stella or my father or what had just happened in that room. We talked about the ceremony, about Ryan's aunt who had started crying during the processional and never really stopped, about the fact that the cake had genuinely been the best either of us had ever eaten, which felt important to document. At some point, Ryan asked how I was feeling. I thought about it for a while. Like, I finally said the thing I've been holding for 3 years. He said, "Good." We left it at that. At 11 o'clock, my phone began vibrating. I looked at the screen. Stella. I turned it face down and went to sleep. In the morning, I picked it up. 143 missed calls. I counted every single one. Not an estimate. The exact number. I needed the exact number. 143 attempts, across a single night, from a person who had spent 3 years moving carefully and quietly, and now had nowhere left to go. 97 text messages. I scrolled without reading all of them, but I scrolled long enough to understand the arc. The first 20 were anger. You humiliated this family. You had no right. How dare you do this in public? Short sentences, some in all caps. The voice of someone who has just discovered that the thing they had been carefully controlling has slipped entirely out of their hands. Around message 23, something shifted. This is fraud. You can't just... Followed by things about lawyers and consequences and how this would look for our family. The voice of someone recalibrating, reaching for leverage that was no longer there. By message 61. Billy, I'm sorry. I panicked. It got out of hand. Please just call me. I've been asked, since sharing parts of this story, whether that apology meant anything, whether the shift to sorry, I panicked, changed anything for me. It didn't. Not because I'm cold, because an apology that arrives as the 61st text of a night that opened with threats isn't an apology. It's a tactic. It's a person who has exhausted everything else and is now trying the last available strategy. I did not respond to any of them. The afternoon of the following day, my father called. I looked at his name on the screen for a long time. Then I answered. His voice was different, quieter, flatter, not defensive. That register I knew well. Something else. The voice of a person who has been sitting with something heavy for hours and has stopped trying to make it comfortable. He said, Billy, I've been up since the reception. I said, I know, Dad. Paul Crawford left his card at the table. I called the office this morning and asked to speak with him. A pause. I was the executor of your grandmother's estate. I had a legal obligation to distribute it correctly. I handed that obligation to Stella without verifying anything she brought me. I signed documents without looking closely. I didn't call you once to confirm anything. I believed her because she was there, and she was confident, and it was easier than questioning. He stopped. I waited. I should have protected you, he said. That was my job. It was literally my legal job, and I didn't do it. I said, Yes, Dad. You should have. Silence. Long enough that I thought the call might drop. Then, what do you need me to do? It was the first time in my adult life that I heard that question from my father and did not have an immediate answer. I said, Call Paul Crawford. He's going to need you to cooperate fully. I will, he said. Without a single hesitation. That told me something. That week, Stella called 22 more times. I answered none of them. At the end of the week, I opened a text message and typed 5 words. My attorney will be in touch. I hit send. I put the phone face down on the counter. I went to make breakfast. That was the last message I sent to Stella. Paul filed the civil suit in November 2025. The complaint named Stella on 3 counts: fraud, conversion of estate assets, and mail tampering. It named my father on 1 count: breach of fiduciary duty in his capacity as executor of the estate of Ruth Hayes. It sought the return of $45,000 plus 3 years of interest, plus compensatory damages for the costs of the investigation. It also requested that the court impose a constructive trust on the investment condo, the property Stella had purchased with $28,000 of my grandmother's money. The constructive trust was granted within 6 weeks. Stella cannot sell that property, cannot refinance it, cannot transfer it to anyone while the claim is pending. The asset she built on my foundation is frozen. The foundation, legally, is mine. Her attorney filed a response characterizing the account arrangement as a good faith family agreement and describing the authorization documents as the result of poor record keeping. The 3 signatures that bore my name but not my hand were, in the official filing, described as disputed. I'll let Paul handle the legal language. What changed things most concretely was my father. 3 weeks after the suit was filed, Alan Larson walked into Paul Crawford's office and signed an affidavit. In it, he confirmed that he had relied entirely on Stella's representations, that he had not independently verified any of the transactions, that he had not obtained authorization from me before the joint account was opened, that Stella had been the person who prepared and presented the authorization documents, and that he had filed them without reviewing them closely. He did this without being pressured. He could have hired his own attorney and maintained everything he did was in good faith. Instead, he walked in on a Thursday morning and told the truth. He looked at me across Paul's conference table afterward and said, "I'm sorry I made it easy for her." I said, "I know, Dad." That was all. It was enough. For now. Donna called me the following week. Not to relitigate anything. Not to explain or apologize or ask about Stella. She called to ask if I wanted to have dinner. Just us. I said yes. We went to a small place she'd been suggesting for months, a restaurant I'd never made time for. She didn't mention Stella once during the entire meal. It was the first time I could remember sitting across from my mother and being the only conversation. Not the background to someone else's story. The thing itself. It was imperfect. It was a beginning. I didn't forgive everything that night. That's not how forgiveness works. And I'm not interested in the version that requires me to pretend things happened differently than they did. But I sat with my mother, and she looked at me, and I let myself be seen by her in a way I hadn't in a long time. That was enough to start with. In December, Ryan and I moved into a new apartment. We'd been looking for a few months, not because we had to, but because we were ready. New kitchen. A second bedroom we haven't figured out yet. Boxes were opening slowly, finding the right place for things as we go. One Saturday morning, about a week after we moved in, Ryan made coffee and I sat down with a book I'd been meaning to finish for 2 years. Nobody called. No one decided anything about my worth or my choices or my future. Just quiet. Just the morning light through a window that was mine, in a space that was mine, with a person I had chosen. Ruth Hayes told me, in a letter she wrote knowing she might not have much time, build something entirely yours. That Saturday morning was the first time I understood exactly what she meant. I want to say something to anyone who might be watching this and recognize something in it. Not the fraud specifically. Not even the family dynamics, necessarily. But the particular experience of being the one who adjusts. The one who makes room, who goes quiet, who asks for less because asking for more means a conversation no one wants to have. The one who is called stable and independent and fine as a way of not being called at all. Adjusting is not loyalty. I spent a long time confusing them. Making myself smaller felt like generosity, like I was choosing peace, like I was being the bigger person. But there is a version of making yourself smaller that isn't generosity at all. It's erasure. And the particular thing about erasure is that it starts to feel like your own idea. You stop noticing when it happens because you've done it so many times you believe it's just how you are. It isn't how you are. It's something you learned. And you can put it down. I stopped calling betrayal family. That was the day everything actually started. If someone in your family has spent years deciding what you are worth, I hope this reminded you that you get to make that call for yourself. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you've been through something like this, tell me in the comments. Because sometimes the most important thing is knowing you're not the only one.